Good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending this evening. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday the 6th of February from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name's Councillor Caroline Brooke and I'm the chairperson of the committee. Some housekeeping points before we begin. This meeting is recorded, live streamed and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. And can everyone please ensure mobile phones are switched off or on silent? I just heard a do. As I said that quite timely. In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow instructions given to you by the team. So can I welcome everybody again to the meeting and look to the agenda. Do we have any apologies this evening, Matthew?
Good evening, Chair, members. No apologies and all members are present. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks, Matthew. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to declare that I'm a housing tenant. So in relation to item 6, where we cover the housing revenue account, I also think it's probably mentioned in the general fund budget as well in item 7, and possibly the HR may be mentioned in the capital investment strategy as well. So just declare that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Hall, did you raise a hand? Oh, no problem at all. Okay. I have no announcements this evening. Minutes of the minutes of the meeting on the 22nd of November 2023. Have you all had a chance to look through these, and are these agreed as a true record of the evening? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you. So we have our lovely TAC members here this evening. And as public participation. So we're moving on to the housing revenue account in a moment. You'd like to speak just before that paper? Absolutely. Okay, so we're moving on to it in just a moment. I'm just going to get the intro and then I'll call you to speak if that's okay. So we have Councillor Westwood here, if you'd like to come to the table to do an intro. And we have Mr. Keys and Mr. Hendy, who will clarify anything if we need it. And it's just you, Mr. Chase, this evening, isn't it? Okay. So if we can have your intro, that would be great. Over to you, Councillor Westwood.
Thank you very much. The HRA budget for 24-25. The HRA is experiencing an unprecedented financial challenge. This is of a magnitude never seen in the sector since we took over responsibility for self-financing our social housing business from the previous government's subsidy scheme back in 2012. The housing revenue account is operated as a ring-fenced landlord account for the provision of social housing to our tenants. It must self-finance, and to ensure financial stability, the rents and service charges must be sufficient to fund the expenditure incurred on to own, operate and continually invest in the properties. The financial planning horizon for the HRA is 30 years. It must annually produce a viable 30-year business plan to demonstrate its ability to self-finance and to show how it has capacity for ambitions to develop new affordable homes for people across the district. We're in a period of high inflation, which is slowly reducing, with interest rates that are higher than experienced over many decades. In addition, building costs have increased by 23% over the last year and 58% over the last 2 years. The cost of living crisis has not gone away and is hitting our most vulnerable tenants hard. We're proud to have over 5,000 council homes in the Winchester district. To improve the energy efficiency of our homes, we're investing £45 million into retrofitting the fabric of our council homes to lower tenants' energy costs and to provide warmer and more comfortable homes. We have to prioritise how and where we spend our tenants' money to deliver best value. And it's right that we now have 2 significant work programmes that both improve the quality and comfort of our existing housing stock, alongside delivering more new, highly energy efficient new homes. Increasing the rent for our social housing and affordable housing is always a difficult decision. However, we have to balance this with our need to have a balanced HRA, the real need for more affordable housing, and the need to upgrade our existing homes to provide our tenants with warmer homes that are less expensive to run. After consultation process with the TACT committee and the TACT focus groups, we have decided to increase rents by 7.7%, which is in line with the government rent policy. I'm also pleased to say that TACT have supported that decision, and I thank them for their support that has allowed us to reach that decision. I'm able today to present today a viable and sustainable business plan, which not only includes investment of £45 million to go greener faster by retrofitting our homes to bring them up to decent homes energy efficiency standards, but also reaffirms our commitment to the 1,000 homes target, albeit over a slightly longer time period. The HRA business planning is carried out annually, and all assumptions are revisited and undertaken afresh every year. When the economic situation improves, with interest rates and building costs at more reasonable levels, we will aim to deliver our 1,000 home target earlier and indeed look to exceed that target. In order to be viable, the business plan assumes several changes in strategy from previous years. These are detailed in the report, but in summary, they include proposals to continue the new approach of acquiring more homes from developers alongside our previous approach of building new homes ourselves. A £400,000 revenue savings plan for the housing service. Disposals of surplus assets to help fund the increased greener, faster capital investment in our existing homes, and investment to digitalise and modernise processes to make them more accessible, simpler, quicker and easier for our customers. Also, to make it possible for contact to be online 24/7 for those who prefer it. Additionally, when we move this through to full council, we will be asking for approval for the HRA budget and business plan for 24-25. The full details are included in the paper, but include the average formula rent increase for affordable and social housing of 7.7% in line with the current government rent policy. A cap of 7.7% increase in tenant service charges in 24-25. The future asset disposal policy for the next 8 years, and specifically the disposal in principle of Barnes House in 24-25. They move to 80% market rents for eco-friendly new homes that meet the council's energy efficiency requirements, where the rent increase is more than offset by lower running costs. And subject to further consultation and review of costs, move towards full cost recovery for private and tenant connections to the council's sewage treatment works in 25-26. Despite the challenging circumstances we face, I believe it's a strong plan that addresses those circumstances whilst improving the service and housing we make available to the current and future tenants who rely on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Mrs. Keys, do you have anything you'd like to add to this, or Mr. Hendy? No?
No, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Westwood's covered a good introduction.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chafe, would you like to come forwards and speak on that housing revenue account budget? Welcome to the meeting, and you have 3 minutes.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. After yesterday's Housing Cabinet meeting, which was very interesting, it was made a comment about what TAC thought. A copy has been given. A housing revenue account. Following earlier TAC meetings, we requested more details on how the account was constructed and what it contained within it. We are grateful as a council for taking this on board, with display charts, detailed explanations provided to TACT. The clarity of the details explains it gives so much that with it. We've been able to support the planned rent and service charge increase of 7.7%. The details have also given TAC members a more informal view of the implications and that market inflation changes have on various other elements of the housing revenue account. That's our comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chafe, much appreciated. If you could turn off your microphone as well, that would be great.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chafe. So it's recommended that the Scrutiny Committee comment on the proposals within the Cabinet Report CAB 3445, which will be considered at the Cabinet meeting on the 8th of February. So I'm going to take it from the main body of the paper and then break down the appendices. So does anybody have any questions on the main body of the report? Councillor Scott.
Chair, I've got a few. Do you want me to do one and then just come back off, or do you want me to do a few in a row?
Carry on. If it's too many, I'll stop you and then we'll come back.
Happy days. Okay, my first point is on page 21 under point 4.1. I'm just wondering if the Cabinet member officers can give a brief indication of how long the consultation will take with the current staffing structure of the service within the housing, because obviously we realise that we've lost quite a few housing officers of late. So just to see what that current position is to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the consultation with staff and unions has been concluded, and we're now in the position to implement the new structure.
Any further news at what we got? Have you got sort of restructuring, as in a property service, a joint with a senior housing officer, which is obviously gone? Have you amalgamated joint roles, or can you explain a bit more of what's happened via the consultation?
Thank you, Chair. There's been a change in the overall structure. We have a new post, which is Head of Landlord Services. That's the only post that is an amalgamation of existing, previous posts. Otherwise, most of the other changes are changes in reporting lines, and there have been a number of vacant posts that have been deleted.
If you have staffing questions, Councillor Scott, do you mind picking them up separately? It's just focusing on the paper itself, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so next one on the paper, which we'll cover on page 21-22, which is under point 6.1 about the rent increase. And my point, obviously, and thanks David coming forward with tact tonight. I just wanted to just concur with what TAC was saying under this point 6.1, but TAC was in agreement with the rent going up 7.7%. I think with a proviso as long as the levels of investment of homes and services was maintained. And if I heard rightly from the Cabinet member, there's a substantial work programme which is happening, is that correct? Which will satisfy what TAC was directing their comments to. So if what you're alluding to what's going to happen within the HRA and the substantial programme that's going to happen for the tenants, then everyone should be happy in many respects with the rent rise. Is that what I'm alluding to?
That's correct. I mean, the discussions we had were brilliant, actually, with TACT, and it was great to work with them. And what we tried to do was to take a more simple and graphical approach. And I credit Mr. Hendy with leading this. And you know, we had diagrams of stacks of where does the money go, and what do we need to actually run the business. And to answer your question specifically, in terms of programs, we clearly put forward that we're looking to continue delivering new highly energy efficient homes, as I said in my introduction, and we still have the target of reaching 1,000 homes, but equally we're diverting significant sums of money now to retrofitting our existing stock. I mean, it's important, as you will be aware, that we do insulate the houses properly and we have a full maintenance program rolling forwards for houses. All of this was explained fully to TACT, and it goes beyond that as well in terms of the new Social Housing Act, in terms of the way that we need to engage with our tenants, and the fact that we need to hear and listen to their voice. So there's a whole energy behind improving the way and the way we contact and work with our tenant base, and get their feedback and feed that back into our service, so we deliver what people want ultimately. So that was all discussed, and that's what Mr. Chafe was alluding to there.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Scott?
Just coming back on the rent rises, I didn't know, and why would I, but perhaps I should do, from a tenant point of view, that the rents can only go up in line with the rent standard of central government regulator. So it's actually quite a safety net. You're just not, the city council just chooses to put rents up willy-nilly. There's an absolute substantial guideline and a regulator that we adhere to. So that's quite a good comfort that we're just not choosing to do it as a council, but we're actually in line with a regulator as well.
That's correct. I mean, there's a government rent policy which is in effect, I believe, till 2025, and the rents will move in line with that government rent policy. As I said in my introduction, that we are aligning to the government rent policy for the rental increases, and we are making an assumption in our forward plan that that policy will continue, but the government has given no announcement on that at the present time. But certainly for this year, we're in line with the rent policy from the government.
Do we have any other questions on the main body of the report? Councillor Reach.
Thank you. I've just got a few questions about sewage, I'm afraid. I was just trying to unpick the thread between paragraph 17.5, 18.2, and again in the appendix 3. In paragraph 17.5, we say that the investment requirements of the HRA sewage treatment works have been established and that there are sufficient funds to meet them, which seems fine. But then again, in paragraph 18.2, we say that we need to assess the amount and value of credits that could be generated by undertaking improvement works at the sewage treatment facilities. It just wasn't clear how those two paragraphs interacted with each other. It sounds as if we've assured ourselves, the council's assured itself, that we have the money required to make the investment, but without necessarily fully appraising the benefits that that benefit would bring. If you could clarify that point, please, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Rich. So just a bit of background, because it's not, well, I didn't know this until I was more involved in this, that we do own and operate over 50 sewage treatment works, small works, which range from 4 or 5, 8 houses on a cesspit to 75 houses on a more fully functional sewage works. And those schemes are, anyone connected to that will have a service charge allocated to providing that service. And so we've been aware that the sewage treatment works are charged at a certain rate, but we want to ensure that all services that we provide from the HRA fund to be fed to all tenants are the costs for those are fully recovered. And so the paper is advocating that we review the costs and the value and the charges from all our sewage treatment works over a period of time, and move slowly over a period to fully recovering the service costs. So in terms of the way that will operate, then we'll have a 6-month consultation period in the next financial year and bring back in the next HRA planning cycle a move to full cost recovery. But equally, we know that your question around the nutrients, as we build more homes, certainly within the Itcham catchment area, then we need to provide nutrient mitigation for those homes. And I think we're all aware that new homes build within the Itcham catchment area has been, to use a water term, dried up for a period of time. Now we have recently upgraded 2 of our water treatment works, and we're now putting cleaner water back into the Itcham, which is a great thing for everybody. But a side benefit of that is that we do obtain nutrient credits for those upgraded water treatment works, which we can use then to unlock a new homes building programme. So we've upgraded 2 of the sites, but we have the opportunity, should we choose to do so, to upgrade more of those sites in the future planning year and future fiscal year. That business case is still being put together, and that paragraph is alluding to the point that there needs to be, we don't want to speculate, there needs to be a proper business case if we are going to upgrade our water treatment works at the expense of the tenants, and that needs to obviously have a financial return to us. So the sewage treatment works are at a point where we want to go to full service charging. We need to understand the best route to get to full service charging so that we're fair to all the connected properties and tenants to that. But equally, we need a proper business case to drive the upgrade to our water treatment works to put more cleaner water in the rivers, and through that process to unlock the nutrient credits that we need to be able to drive a new homes programme forwards. So there's a chain of events there that you're unpicking.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I have a couple of questions, if I may. 13.5, the rent levels for future new homes is to be set at 80% of market rent. And we had a useful discussion earlier this week with the portfolio holder and also the portfolio holder for finance to ensure that when we bring these properties to the residents for the opportunity to move in, that we clarify the overall cost, because obviously the assumption is that they will have a higher rent but actually a lower running cost relative to a lower social rent level, and perhaps because they haven't had any retrofit activity, or they're not at the appropriate standard, that their running costs would be higher. So we're looking to be really clear about the sort of equity of the different rent strategies and the running costs for our properties. And I wonder whether the portfolio holder in this scrutiny meeting would be happy to confirm that we will take that approach and that we will build that into the papers going forward, so that we're all clear that the 80% is very specific against those new properties, new builds with enhanced energy efficiency. That's not for a current property that's suddenly going to have an 80% level. That's my first question, Chair. And I'm going to ask it again because I keep asking it, no one's listening, but I do hope that at some point we don't rue the day. Asset disposals on 14.3, we say that we're going to dispose of Barnes House, and I've heard many of the housing teams say that they don't think it's really appropriate. What I'm struggling with is the cart before the horse, because we are currently undertaking a temporary accommodation review in full, and which I think is to be welcomed and understood given the dynamics in the marketplace. And even though this property may not be perfect for the future, I question whether now is the time to dispose of that. Maybe we should put that into a slightly longer time frame. So, Chair, I'm seeking probably reassurance from Mrs. Keys, because as I understand it, this that's 800,000 we're looking to achieve as a fundamental to the budget, and I get that, that's an injection of cash. But my question is, are there other ways of doing that just to ensure that we don't find ourselves compromised when we've had our temporary accommodation review? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hurrell. So firstly, who'd like to respond on the 80% only applying to very specific? Councillor Westwood.
Thank you. And thank you for the question, Councillor Hurrell. As per Cabinet Housing Committee meeting yesterday, and the answer I gave at the time, and I've got the extract from the minutes in front of me here. I can confirm again that the 80% market rent will be applied only to our new homes that meet our higher energy efficiency standards, and that the 80% market rent, which would also include service charge in that rent, when you take into account the significantly lower energy costs associated with owning and running those homes, will be less than the market rent at 70%, so that it'll be cheaper for somebody to run those homes, and at 80% market rent with lower energy costs. I also confirmed that we would look to make that very clear on Hampshire Home Choice when people are looking at the rents on those homes, so that you can compare like for like, which I think is only fair. The second question, Mr. Keys, do you?
It was about the timing of the sale of Barnes House. Mr. Hendy.
Thank you, Chair. At Cabcom Cabinet Committee Housing yesterday, this was discussed, as Councillor Hurrell said, and hopefully officers gave the reassurance that considerable work has been done in relation to the vacant property Barnes House at the moment to establish what would need to be invested if we were to use it for temporary accommodation. Also, work's been done looking as to whether the site could be redeveloped, and there are reasons why the site can't be redeveloped. Councillor Hurrell's raised the point that the HRA business plan is premised on achieving an £800,000 capital receipt from the sale of that at the moment. And on top of that, I think it's the next 5 years, there's an assumption that £500,000 worth of capital receipts will be generated from disposal. So if Barnes House isn't disposed, then in effect, we need to find another way to find £800,000 worth of disposals in the next financial year. Take the point that we're in the process of looking at temporary accommodation review at the moment to meet homelessness demand, but there are a number of different ways that we can do that which wouldn't impact on the housing revenue account.
Is that okay, Councillor?
Well, I suppose the backup question to Mrs. Keys is, what is the backup plan if we don't sell it? Let's say it's not sold, the 800,000, which is key to the budget. What is the backup plan for that money? Thank you.
Obviously, if any of the assumptions that we've prepared the HRA business plan on should change over time, we're constantly monitoring those, and then in 12 months' time, we will bring a completely refreshed set of assumptions and a business plan for the future 30 years. So at this point, we've got an assumption that there will be a capital receipt in there, and if that doesn't happen in this financial year, or it doesn't, it's not that value, then we'll refresh all of those assumptions.
Thank you, Mr. Keys. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. On page 33, under shared ownership rents, 15.13. As a backdrop of this question, I'm going to say I've been saying for some time about the different tenures that we should be providing our people on the housing waiting list. So I take comfort in this paragraph that starts the saying the HRA business plan assumes that 30% of new future homes development will be delivered in shared ownership. Moving forward, it gives an opportunity for especially the young people of our district to start putting a foot on the ladder. So can I find comfort in that sentence, please, Cabinet Member, that we will keep on looking at different tenures which will provide housing for especially our young people of the district? Because I take good comfort if that sentence is how I read it. Thanks.
Yes, I think you can take comfort in that sentence as you've read it. And it's not just the housing paper, the HRA paper here. We debated and passed through the housing strategy for the next 5 years at the Cabinet Committee Housing in November. And it's not just council housing. We need to drive affordable housing and housing for younger people through multiple avenues, not just through the council build as well. So we need to work with the registered providers to do that. We need to work with the builders to do that. And so there's actions in place from our housing strategy. Equally, we set up our own housing company, Venture Living, and we are, as you're well aware, bringing the flats at Winnow is the first houses into that, and the statement there that we'll be building shared ownership houses going forward. So an example of that's what we've actually done in Whiteley that we've delivered this year as well. So that is the intention as stated in the paper.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Reach.
Thank you. Also on paragraph 17.5, we talk about funding to replace the sewage treatment vehicle with one that can operate on hydrogenated vegetable oil. In another paper in the agenda later on, we also talk about doing the same for our bin lorries. Is there any economies of scale between those two, or are those completely separate projects, please?
Okay, as far as I am aware, I'm looking at my director across the corner here, that these are separate projects.
They are separate projects, Chair, although we have been in discussion, you're probably aware from the other paper, in discussion with BIFA in terms of the use of HVO to fund the waste fleet at the moment. They've given initial indications that we will be able to access that HVO, that they are assuring us that will be accredited, so we can ensure the provenance of that HVO to use in our tank, because it's quite difficult to purchase that individually ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, in 18.2, we talk about the budget that's unallocated for new build, and we're all, I think, equally committed to our new build programme and the aspiration to keep driving sites forward. But much of that is unallocated, and although we have a change in strategy to purchase primarily from larger sites where their homes are available for our use. What I'm not seeing articulated fully here, and I wasn't able, and I hope Mrs. Keyes can help me on this, to understand how we're going to stick with our desire to continue to drive rural housing, and where in the budget we've got sufficient monies to drive those other schemes outside of the sort of purchasing. I think there was a general view at the Cabinet Housing from councillors who represent other areas that is an important strategy to have new build in some of our smaller communities. But in the budget, I'm concerned as to where that resource is available to us to allow us to make that extra effort over and above, obviously, the new build that we're already committed to undertaking. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hendy.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the HRA business plan overall provides provision for the 1,000 homes over the next 10 years. Clearly, in terms of looking at opportunities, we will review the existing programme, the prospects that exist at the moment to deliver that. The report says that there will be a change of strategy in terms of looking to acquire more affordable housing via affordable housing obligations, quite frankly, because that's the most economic way of doing it. However, as was mentioned at Cabinet Committee Housing yesterday, if there are opportunities that are cost effective and clearly meet demand across the district, and we would be keen to follow those up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. Does anybody else have any other questions on the main body of the report? Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on from that last question then. Will the council look at
funding building on rural exception sites if they are the only ones that come available in those small communities?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we come on to the appendices, any further questions on the main body of the report? No. Okay, I'll come on to Appendix 1 then, which is on page 38 to 39. Does anybody have any questions specifically on Appendix A? Appendix 1, sorry, Appendix 2 on page 40. Appendix 3 on page 41. Councillor Scott.
Just specifically because we do have a great line there, which is called estate improvements. I wonder if the officers can update us on how well used the estate improvement programme is and how subscribed it is, probably from members and so forth like that, and from tenants direct in around the district. But that's something that's been an enhancement for our tenants for some time now. Thanks.
Yes, we are reviewing currently how we will be using the estate improvement budget. We are very keen to do that in consultation with our tenants and perhaps to have them involved a little bit more. As you know, we've done lots of projects with yourself through the estate improvements. We are looking at a whole new way of consulting with our tenants, and that budget will be really useful to be able to do things within their communities as and when they're needed. We've predominantly done big projects, as you know, through parking, and we're looking now to look at more that are beneficial to the environment and more health and wellbeing options for our tenants. So it is still in place. It has been, as you say, it has been a challenge of late with staffing resources to keep people in that post, but I'm pleased to say that we've got somebody in post at the moment. So there are a few projects that have been on hold that will now come forward.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, in the major repairs for 24-25, and I think many of us are concerned that we continue to keep all of our properties at the highest level of repair and ensure that they do meet the decent home standard. Could we just clarify the move from the latest forecast on major repairs to the budget for 24-25, and indeed the climate change emergency work? So in terms of retrofit, where the various elements are driving those two budgets on climate change emergency, we have 2.2 to 4.9. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The change in the figures are driven by the stock condition information that we have that identify the components and the work that's required each year. So that will drive the major repairs change from 6.2 latest forecast to a budget of £10 million in 4.5. The climate emergency work, as has already been mentioned, is the work that's required to get our stock to an EPC rating of C overall by the end of 2030-31, so it will enhance the existing programme of insulation, also include some additional work to facilitate that insulation work. And Councillor Horrell will be aware from the debate at Cabinet Committee Housing yesterday that we're now going to be investing some more work to facilitate our customers taking up the opportunities for that, specifically around things like loft insulation. So that really is bringing forward works that need to be undertaken to achieve EPC, a significant basis. Some additional work, such as, for example, bringing forward window replacement programs, which were further into the future of the programme, that are now being brought forward and funded out of the climate change emergency programme. So that's a bit of an explanation of some of those additional works that will be contained within that line.
And Chair, could I just ask, we fire safety provision work, which is obviously important. We have legislative requirements to meet. As of 26, we have no budget. Is that because we believe we'll be compliant? We have no other plans on fire safety provision? Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, as far as I'm aware, that will be the completion of the work. I can't confirm that, so I'm quite happy to take that away and come back if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? We were on Appendix 4, we're now on Appendix 5. Any other questions on Appendix 5? Appendix 6. No. Do we have any debate on this paper? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Again, thank you for presenting the HRA paper to us as Scrutiny. It just again goes to show how fantastic our provision for our tenants are. I look forward to the restructuring in the housing to see new property services structure coming in. Sad to see some officers, go, because some of them have been outstanding officers over many years, and our thanks goes to them for their service here. It's good that there's a good relationship with TACT and TACT's involved in discussions especially when it's not an easy decision to put up rents, and obviously they're clear indication of, as long as we see investment in services, where it's a clear steer from the cabinet member, there's an awful lot in the programme over the 10 years that's going to happen in to keep us under decent home standard for our tenants. I concur with what Mr. Henley said about window replacement. I think that's key to come into the factor soon in housing. I do also think that the 80% new homes explanation under 13.6 is better in this paper, because I was really lacking that last time. So I thank you for providing a bit more information on that, because I was at a loss last time and I was struggling with the 80%. But that explanation is far better in this paper, and thank you for that. I do concur with different tenures and different opportunities for people to get a foot on the housing ladder around the district. It's not all just social housing. We're coming into a different climate of how we dare to function as a housing provider. I do hope and pray our housing company has a really good future. It's got a good start with Winnow Flats, but something we've been building to for some years now to get that housing company up and running. And I just want to thank Mrs. Knight and her housing team with all the stuff they do, whether it's repairs or allocations or just that gentle advice for tenants of things that are not quite right out in the estates, that some people are wanting that comfort from an area housing officer intervention now and again, or some form of disabled adaptation that we sometimes provide for our OT services. All the sort of different facets and things that come through to make the housing service what it is provided for the district tenants. And the estate improvements, I think, has been an absolute fantastic thing for many years. I do think sometimes it's got a bit of a monster with lots of parking and whatever, and it needed reining in. But I think on the whole, it does provide some good opportunities for tenants to have some real benefits there. And if it all homes into the environment and tenants' well-being, that can only be a good thing. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Does anybody else have any debates on this paper? Councillor Hort.
Chair, I don't think we could let this evening go without saying well done to the officer team, those who are here and those who recently departed. Thank you. I think we should all be hugely proud of the HRA account and all the homes and communities that we support across the district. It's a hugely valuable element of our work. I do welcome the recommendation in the report to take our time to review service charges, both for tenants and for the thorny issue of the sewerage. I think that's appropriate, and I hope that we'll get a good resolution and we'll give everyone the right time to do that. I'm grateful to the portfolio holder for confirming that we'll be really clear about the 80% and the running costs when we advertise properties. I think that's hugely helpful and a very important addition. I also would like to just get some better clarity, I think, going forward on new homes. I think there are many councillors in rural areas that really want to see the rural piece of that articulated more clearly. I'm struggling still to see where that resource is in the budget, and also to ensure that we purchase across the whole geography of the district. There are one or two sites that clearly would be in our purchase zone, but part of what we all do, I think, is to try and make sustainable communities in our villages and market towns across the district. And of course, Sharon, you reminded me of this the other day. This sits alongside the housing strategy paper that's very clear about where we're heading as a council in our approach to housing, not just our own, but more generally. And I think that is a very important document to be read in combination with the budget. So, and like others, I thank the TAC team for their support in endorsing the rent increase for this year and working alongside the officer team to make sure that we provide the best homes and the best communities for all our residents in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. There's no further debate. I'd like to reiterate my thanks and thank you for coming along this evening and answering all of our questions on this paper. Thank you, Councillor Westwood, for coming along and also answering the questions. And so you may now be excused. Thank you to the TAC team. Thank you, Mr. Chief, for coming along and speaking to us and for all of your support. So much appreciated. The only comment I had to move forward with was that Mr. Hendy will come back to committee regarding fire safety budget stopping in 2026 and clarify that going forward. So if nobody else got anything I missed, thank you for that one. We shall move on to the next item. Councillor Horrell has just said for me to note that Councillor Westwood will do the articulation of the rents on the 80%, and I know you also said that yesterday, but I will make a note of that for the scrutiny minutes as well, Councillor Westwood. Thank you. So that brings us on to item 7 this evening. Apologies, committee. We were just discussing because we have our Hampshire County Council colleagues in the room with us, and they are here for just one item, and we were going to swap 8 and 9 around, but I'm wondering whether we can put the Treasury Management piece on now before we go to the General Fund piece so that we can get you home for your evening a bit earlier. Does anybody have any issues with that? No? Okay. So if we can come on to item 9 then on our agenda. Councillor Cutler, it's still you doing our intro. So it's the Treasury Management Strategy 2024 to 25. I can ask you to introduce Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Chair. It's a requirement of the CIPFA Treasury Management Code that all councils must approve a Treasury Management Strategy, which we bring annually to Council. The strategy set out in this report has been produced with input from Hampshire County Council Investments and Borrowing Team, who manage the cash balances, investment of surplus cash, and sourcing of short-term borrowing. And Arling Close also put input in. They are the council's treasury advisors. The strategy sets out the forecast borrowing need based on the capital investment strategy and the general fund and the HRA budgets. The borrowing strategy, and the investment strategy, and the treasury management prudential indicators. There are very few changes from other years. The main one being a reduction in the limit, I think, from 25 million to 20. I'm just doing this off the top of my head because I thought I had it written down, but I haven't. Questions obviously to our advisors and to Neil Aitken, who are the experts on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. So in the room with us, we have Neil Aitken for this paper, and we have Gemma Farley and Daniel O'Rourke from Hampshire County Council. So thank you for joining us this evening. It's recommended that we as the Scrutiny Committee comment on the proposals within the report, which is CAB 3446, which will also be considered by Cabinet at its meeting on the 8th of February 2020. Do I have any questions on the main body of the report, which goes from page 131 to 158? No questions on the main body? Okay, I'll move on to Appendix A, which is on page 159. For our agenda packs, does anybody have any questions on Agenda A? No. Sorry, Appendix A. Appendix B, page 161. And Appendix C, page 162. Does anybody have any debate on the paper? Apparently not. Thank you. May carry on with your evening, and I very much appreciate you coming down. Just in case we had any questions. Was there anything else you wanted to say on the paper at all? No? Thank you very much. Thank you, committee. It was obviously very clear and we didn't have any questions. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7 of the agenda, the General Fund Budget 24-25. Councillor Cutler, could you please introduce this one for us? We also have Liz Keys here for an additional intro if anything clarification is required.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman. This committee at its last meeting reviewed the budget option proposals back in November and made very few comments actually. Since then, we have received the 1-year settlement agreement, which was as forecast by our team. I think there was a difference of £11,000 between the forecast and what we actually got. And this settlement agreement also pushed back the local government financing review yet again for a further year, and that would also include the reset of business rates. So the budget projections have now been updated based on this, and the new medium-term financial plan is shown at Appendix A. This shows that although the Council's immediate financial position to 2026 is stable, there are increasing forecast deficits in the longer term. To address these future pressures, the Council has embarked on an organisation-wide transformation programme in order to close the £3 million gap in funding within 3 years. I'm pleased to include in the report an update on the TC25 transformation project. The immediate savings and areas of income generation form a solid foundation and show a positive start to the transformation programme from across the organisation. Longer term in-depth investor save plans are underway and include improvements to our website and app to make contacting us and reporting things to us easier, streamlining the back office for car parking and to help improve the operation of our car parks, and also to gather data quicker which is very important. Digitalisation of the planning service to make submission of applications easier and the processing of them more efficient. That's just some of the projects that we're including in this scheme. The report before you today details the proposals for additional savings and spending and investment the year ahead in order to support core services and enhance continued delivery to the priorities of the council plan. There is particular focus on greener, faster, the greener, faster priority by investing in enhanced recycling and food waste collection, which will be a very important project over the next 2 or 3 years. And also the decarbonisation of our waste fleet, cutting the council's carbon emissions by 25%. In addition, support for residents experiencing cost of living hardship is maintained by uprating the council tax reduction scheme and additional funding for the council tax hardship schemes, while the council continues to maintain its community grant schemes. Despite the longer term challenges, I'm pleased to be able to bring forward a budget for 24-25 that is not only balanced but maintains core services to residents and increases capacity for transformation of our service. Chair, I'm happy to take further questions on this.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. So coming to the report itself, the main body of the report is on page 45 to 69 of our agenda packs. Does anybody have any questions on the main body of that report? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. I have a couple if I pitch those in as a starter. On page 49, we talk about extending the exceptional financial hardship fund by just using up the remaining balance. But given some of the pressures on our residents, have we not considered at least some new money to that particular hardship fund detailed in 3B? Also, Chair, in 4B, the idea to reduce the long-term empty property period from 2 to 1 year seems a very positive initiative. Can the portfolio holder or the finance team help me to understand what that means in terms of actual numbers of properties and what we might recoup? Thank you.
That's Colour.
Well, in terms of the exceptional hardship fund, there was 50,000 put in the exceptional hardship scheme last year. 12,000 is used through to January this year. We believe that the 38,000 will be sufficient as things stand. I think if it was used up, we could review that later in the year. And in terms of the, I don't know if we actually have the figures. Mrs. Keys may well have the figures for the number of properties that's likely to affect. One key point that isn't in the paper, but just I think for clarity we do need to add, is that we have been assured that within this scheme we can make sure that 1 year does not, the clock doesn't start ticking in instances where probate is required, because that's quite important. Probate's been taking quite a long time for a lot of people, so that the clock starts ticking for that 1 year when probate's granted in the case of where it's around that problem. But Mrs. Keys may have some figures on.
Chair, I don't have figures with me this evening on the number of properties that relates to. Clearly, we will look to do that work through the year before that is implemented in 12 months' time. It's a very difficult value to quantify because the number of properties coming into and out of that category is constantly changing, and the recovery rate, you know, the achievable recovery of that council tax varies across the year. So we will look at working up some more of the detail behind that as the year progresses.
Thank you. Councillor Reach.
Thank you, Chair. There's 3 questions which I'd like to ask. The first is hopefully a simple one on page 59 around the redesign of the civil enforcement team, from which we're expecting to bank a saving. Just checking that won't come at the cost of reduced enforcement or reduced fines or whatever we might get through the work of that team. The second point was around 13.3, around the Guildhall and Abbey House corporate letting strategy. I'm sorry to jump to the next paper, but on page 97, we talk about an investment programme for this very building we're sat in, and I would like some reassurance that those two work together. And then the final point around the Winchester Town charge, mostly in paragraph 17, but also in a number of other places in the paper, what steps we've taken to assure ourselves that is a reasonable and fair level of charge for the town area, perhaps with reference to other neighbouring authorities who may or may not have town councils, but a body that is analogous to the town forum. Thank you.
Councillor Cutler, Mrs. Keys.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so on the first point around the redesign of the civil enforcement team, that's linked with changes that happen within the parking team when on-street parking moved to our colleagues at the County Council. So no, that we're not looking at reducing the amount of enforcement there. Your second question on Guildhall lettings and ensuring that that was all taking into account that the capital works on the building, absolutely, it's all part and parcel of a wider project on the future use of the Guildhall. And the Winchester Town Forum, obviously Winchester Town Forum looked in detail at their requirement for the precept and what they needed to raise in order to balance their budget. But I can reassure the committee that the level of raise is consistent with what we are seeing from parishes across the district. So it's at a very similar level if you take an average across parish areas within the district.
Question from me. The Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, it was proposed that there would be some investigation into some ways that we could invest to have our own carbon offsetting sort of projects. I don't see any mention of it in the budget here at all. I wondered if you could come back to me on where I might find that or where that might be covered off for next year's investments, but where that we've only got a year left before your target.
Well, any investment in carbon solar projects and that type would be within the capital investment strategy, and I think you might find it there. In terms of the investigation as the feasibility will come out of the carbon reserve, will it not? Would that be correct?
Yes, Chair. We have money set aside in a baseline budget and a reserve to support those carbon neutrality projects as they come forward.
Thank you. And where can I find the details of what's set aside?
So in Appendix C, you can see a summary of the earmarked reserves, and within there we've got a greener, faster reserve, which is specifically set aside for funding those greener, faster projects.
Thank you. Just under the greener, faster section, under the recommendations, you've got £200,000 for the carbon reduction measures on waste and recycling, 1.4 million per annum on expanding recycling services. So there's a whole lot listed in there, but none of it was to do with the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan goal of investing. That was all.
To be clear, those figures are budget changes in term, and if you look at Appendix B, I think where it summarises all the proposals, then with the future of waste and recycling, we need to allocate to the budget the additional cost of running the scheme of future of food waste, which we estimate to be around about 1.4 million a year. It's not allocated in this year's budget, if you look at the figures, but there is 700, about half of it in the following year, because we intend to implement in 25-26 and in the middle, somewhere in the middle of the year, and then the ongoing cost will be around about 1.4 million, but we've also put in there the expectation that government say they will cover the cost. Now, what we're doing from a budgetary point of view is saying we expect to get 80% of the cost, because very rarely do we get it all. There is a further sum in the budget of £131,000, which we have set aside, which was the increase from the allowance from the announcement a couple of weeks ago when government put £500 million into social care. They also put another additional 100,000 into broader local government expenditure, which worked out as 131,000 for us. We've set that aside for implementation of the food waste strategy, because this year quite a lot of work will have to be done in developing the scheme. So we have two separate things. There's the implementation and the cost of running it. And then in the capital strategy, when we talk about food waste, there is also the cost of setting it up, because obviously there'll be bins and there'll be vehicles. So that's why I emphasised at the beginning that the future of waste and recycling is probably one of our biggest challenges and projects over the next 2 years. We have to implement by April 26, and you know, from our residents' point of view, it's key. We don't want any major disruption to the process. It's the one thing we really get noticed for. We're determined to get it right, so we are setting.
My question wasn't about waste and recycling, though. It was about the carbon neutrality action
Sorry,
plan.
but I mean,
Thank
you did
for
bring
your-
in food waste into
for
that, so
your-
I was just trying to clarify.
Only because I was reading it wasn't on that list of the greener, faster carbon reduction investment possibility proposals. When Ms Keys had said that it was under that section in Appendix C, but it wasn't part of the list on the proposals. Hence, I just mentioned it in brief. Thank you. I got a lot more information than I asked for. Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure we're all used to the use of the euphemism efficiency when we actually mean cut. Looking at that list at para 13.1 of the TC25 items of progress so far, one of them there's the redesign of the private sector housing team. I am told that that has already resulted in a cut to that team, and that they're no longer able, because they don't have the capacity to intervene in disputes between tenants and social housing agencies. Can we be reassured that the aims of TC25 are to seek true efficiency and not just an exercise that results in the level of service being reduced?
I think that might be an answer for the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Pett. I can see on page 59 there is a redesign of the private sector housing team, and indeed there is a vacancy in that team, and as part of the restructure that vacancy has been removed from the structure. There is no brief that we no longer can do certain activities within the private sector housing team. Clearly that team has been very busy. You'll be aware, of course, of the government's interest in damp and mould. We place a high store in our work on homelessness, and we place a high store on our work in private sector landlord tenancy disputes. However, Councillor Cutler is completely clear that our TC25 work is about transformation, but transformation will mean there could be a change to the services that the council offers. But if that is the case, then that decision will be made in due course and will be a subject for Cabinet to consider. So I'm not sure if that's a conversation that's been had with a member of staff, but there is certainly no brief that we are unable to undertake certain works with respect to private sector housing due to the removal from the establishment of a current vacant post. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, in the purpose on page 47, clarification from Mrs. Keys, is it not true that we've had over £6 million received in grants and additional monies from the government over and above where we anticipated our original income. So I just wonder how we can say in this report that we still face many of the same pressures when we actually had such a substantial injection of additional cash that originally wasn't forecast. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask you to clarify when you say £6 million of additional income over what we forecast? What are you referring to? Is there a number?
The monies received from government on all sorts of grants and additional funds that we've had granted to Winchester, which were not in the original budget for the last year. Well, in fact, they've been coming in for over a period of time. I'm looking for clarification as to what that total amount was and why we still feel that we have pressures, given that we've had such an inflow of additional monies that we hadn't originally forecast. Thank you. If my number's right, maybe you can put me, if my number is not correct, perhaps you can confirm what amounts have come in. Thank
you. Yeah, I mean, as Councillor Cutler said in the introduction to the report, we had forecast our core funding from central government. We forecast it last year in the MTFS, and we refreshed it again in November. And actually, the amount that we received was within £16,000 of the forecast amount. So within our medium-term financial strategy, we are forecasting a level of government funding, and we're certainly not receiving over and above that level of funding.
Yeah.
Then could I just clarify, Chair, through you, or through Councillor Cutler, sorry.
Well, I must admit I'm at a loss to understand what you're referring to. We have bid for things like the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. They're not part of our core funding. They're for grants to other people. They're not part of the day-to-day running of the council and can't be included as. So we still face longer term pressures because we don't know what we're going to get in the future. Part of the reason we face long-term pressures is because government has failed for the last 5 years to actually implement a longer-term funding solution for local government. You know that, we all know that, and to try and pretend that one-off grants somehow resolve the situation is really quite a quite a wrong way of looking at it. Let's put it that way. We know we've got the long-term pressures.
Yeah, if I may, what I'm looking to establish is what are the additional, and they're not the base funding, as you say, these are additional funds that have come to Winchester for various specific activities. I'm just trying to understand the amount that we have received incrementally as an authority for some of those other projects that we have bid for and been successful on, that have been funded through different pots of money and different departments in the government. Thank you.
Yes, we can probably produce the information, not here and now, as to what the grants and what they've been for. But I mean, the key point is that it's not long-term funding and it's not part of our base funding for running the council. We do face, I mean, you're implying that I was suggesting we had pressures when we don't. We do have pressures in the future, huge pressures.
Chair, through you, I'm not implying anything. I'm just seeking the facts which you kindly said you provide, which is how much have we received and specifically against which activities, and that would be most helpful. Thank you.
Just to clarify, Councillor Horrell, are you asking for the amounts that were received over and above the forecast amounts?
So both Councillor Cutler and Mrs. Keys have confirmed what we've received in terms of the allocations of funds to us. These are funds that have come to us for other specific designated activities that we maybe have bid for and received monies. So if that can be articulated, that would be most helpful. Thank you.
I think if I can clarify, we're very happy to provide. We will double check the picture of whether we received any extra in-year general fund funding, which I'm not aware that we did. we get grants for pass through. I mean, we can tell you how much we've paid out in housing benefit or other things where we, you know, or how much we've collected for Hampshire County Council and passed on to them. I mean, these are not meaningful numbers in terms of the general fund budget, but we're very happy to provide that kind of view. But the focus this evening is the general fund. It's not pots of money that we hold and pay on that are given to us for earmarked purposes.
I suggest perhaps if Councillor Horrell has a couple of specifics that she's looking for, we can provide that. I mean, for instance, Councillor Horrell has mentioned the Shared Prosperity Fund. We've certainly received a sum of money for that, and we have deployed those on activities in addition to what is in our core funding. Obviously, received funding for supporting our Ukrainian guests. You know, that is grant funding from government. I'm not sure if I knew what the specifics were, I could answer the question.
Chair,
We used to receive COVID grants. We don't. That was an addition. So I think it's that you're looking for, Councillor.
it is, Chair, through you. Thank you to the Chief Executive. It's exactly that. Those other funds, it is not, which you've been able to then give to specific activities. As the two you've just mentioned are perfect examples. They are not about core funding. This is over and above. Thank you, through you, Chair, to the Chief.
Any other questions on this? If not, I'll ask mine. At the start of the paper in the actions, it says about a reduction of 100,000 under building control. And I'm afraid I left my machine at home, so where I'd put my notes, so I can't remember where in the report it was I saw it, that you were increasing the building control fees. So is that 100,000 after you've taken into account the increase in fees? I was just a bit confused by that.
No, as things stand, the core, the baseline budget of what we expected for building control fees has not been achieved. Therefore, we cut that level. As part of a review of things, we have increased the fees that we hope to claw it back. We won't claw it back in the first year. So we keep the two things separate. You know, the base budget at the moment is reduced by 100,000 because of the expected fees. The increase in fees won't take effect for a while, so won't affect the base budget immediately. So, you know, that's in there as well, but it's because it's phased in. It changes the dynamic. So we've shown them separately for clarity, but clearly not quite as clear as I would have liked it to be.
The budget does have me baffled at times, so it could just be me, but I was definitely confused by that. I wasn't sure which was right. Thank you for your clarification, Mrs. Keys.
Just to add to that, yeah, the recommendation around reducing the land charges income budget is because we have revised our estimates due to the volume of work. So it's the volume of fees, not the volume of work that's going through, not the fees that are being charged. So yes, so we've adjusted for those two separately.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions on the main body of the paper? Councillor Horrell?
Chair, I know that listening better is one of our key council plan objectives, and we had some helpful indicators from the resident survey on the budget, but we only had a very limited number, 200, circa 200 people who replied to what is obviously a very important document in terms of the investment in the district. Is there a thought as to how we can improve that response level to be more in keeping with the aspirations in the council plan and ensure that the direction of travel we're being guided on by residents is truly representative? Thank you.
Yes, some years ago we attempted we did set out as a budget simulator, which was quite effective, but we'd need to do that earlier in the year, and I think maybe that's something we could look at, whether our consultation goes earlier. The budget simulator, if I remember, still only had about 200 people used it, but it was interesting because people had to provide a balanced budget, which meant that they couldn't say, we don't want an increase in council tax, but we want you to spend a lot of money, because at the end they had to provide a balanced budget. So it's quite an interesting exercise. Whether that's a good way of consultation, perhaps we will take that away to have a look. Partly because our changes aren't huge this year. We didn't feel that there was a huge amount of controversy there. And given the time, I mean, it was an interesting response, because people seem to recognise that there are problems with local government finance, and seem to accept an increase in council tax, even that small number. To try and have a really big response to a budget paper is hard work, quite frankly, but we will look at that again another year.
Just to add to that, Chair, yes, given the engagement that we've had from the public over previous years, you know, getting 200 responses to that is pleasing, but we do recognise that obviously we will need more in-depth and more consultation and engagement with all stakeholders as we develop TC25 proposals and the budget going forward. So this is a relatively light touch piece of engagement compared to what we know we need in the future. Hopefully we will be able to build in questions around our finances and our budget and our transformation plans within future resident surveys, for instance.
Thank you. Okay, again, this might just be me, but in 2027, there's the forecast deficit of 2.9 million. Is that after our hoped and desired savings from TC25, or if we have those savings, that will be significantly reduced?
This is an indication based on our baseline budget as it stands now, and the expected funding. And if you look at the top line, you'll see that some of the assumptions made, such as increases in council tax, increase in council tax base, what inflation would be, but it's not. It's then continuing that core budget through over time, which is why it becomes less accurate over time, you know, when you go for 10, 15 years. But it's an indication that if we do nothing, that's where we'll be. And so that's why we've implemented the TC25 process, because otherwise what one tends to do is look at it in a couple of years' time and say, right, well, we'll just have to cut the budget. And we want to have a far more sort of nuanced approach and planned approach to reducing that over time. So, for example, in November, we hadn't actually realised the earliest, because we were only going through the Star Chamber process at the time, looking at the proposals at in the different departments for TC25. And one of the things that came out was there were some short-term savings that can be achieved now. You know, they can come off the base budget now. Other things we know will be longer term, and we'll be scoping those this year and implementing those projects to get the savings in 2 or 3 years' time. But of course, we found 600,000 straight away.
And have they been removed?
And they're in there.
They're in there. Okay.
But we can't put projections of things that we haven't scoped yet. But the aim of TC25 is to reduce that 2.9 million to 0, so that when we get there, and if we're wrong about the income projections, you know, the funding projections, and they turn out to be higher, then we will have more money to spend. That's great, but we won't actually get into the position where we're sending a Section 114 notice off to government and having to cut our services. You know, that's the aim.
But presumably that's worst case scenario, because there will be, as we've just discussed, additional grants from government, probably, that we're not taking into account in our budgeting. So is that a worst case scenario figure?
Well, it's based on the advice that we have for our core funding. Most of the additional stuff is given to us for a reason, to do something additional specific. What we're talking about is the core day-to-day running of the council. Those one-off grants, that's why I made the point to Councillor Horrell earlier. Those one-off grants are for a specific purpose. They're not part of the core funding.
But there's also funding that you keep referring to every time that the government still haven't sorted out what they're doing with. They might have done by 2027, mightn't they?
Yes, but I think we are, you know, and we are actually putting in here the proposals of the most likely, you know, of the advice we have that the government plans for the fair funding review, as they called it. If they implement it, this is what would happen. If we get a change of government, there may be a different way of looking at things. But the reality is that local government finances are so poor, and the country is so short of money, and we're a wealthy area. We are unlikely to get, under any scenario, a huge increase in core funding.
Councillor Todd, welcome to the table.
Thank you very much indeed. I think a useful bit of perspective here, and this gives an indication in terms of the direction of travel of what's going on, relates to the, I think it was 600 million the government's just announced to be put into local government, which was announced in the last week or so. And Hampshire is getting over 10 million of that. It still leaves them with a need to take 75 million out of reserves in the coming year, and to run out of reserves in the year after, unless something changes in the government funding settlement. So it's you know, it means they only take 75 million out of reserves rather than 85. We got, I think, what, 113,000. So 130,000. 130,000. So that gives the perspective of what we're seeing when we read the mood music from central government. I mean, there is enormous uncertainty. It is ridiculous that, you know, with Hampshire's cabinet meeting earlier today, our scrutiny meeting today, we were getting emails this morning telling us about new bits of money one way or another that may happen to us or may not this year or next year. It's no sane basis for running planning for the future. But everything we've heard is that they will be looking at certain sources of funding that we have historically relied on, particularly new homes bonus and also business rates. And everything we see in terms of where the financial pressures are within the system is that it is within the upper tier authorities and the unitaries, so that a prudent approach to budgeting, you know, and planning for the future effectively says we cannot assume ongoing current levels of government support into the long-term future, and we need to budget prudently on that basis. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we look at the financial settlement, and I think any of us who are around the table at the moment, we know where the pressures are in local government at the moment. There is a general pressure that our costs are inflating at a higher rate than the amount that we're able to put up council tax, and that's, everybody faces that. But we know that there are particular pressures in terms of demand within children's services and adult services, and then for certain authorities there is an explosive growth in temporary accommodation demand, which we're seeing a version of, but we're not Hastings, put it that way. We're not Eastbourne or Hastings or those authorities which are being absolutely walloped on it. So what's being done, I think, is very prudent. And
I'm not questioning the prudency. I'm asking if the 2.9 million is the worst case scenario, and it sounds like it is from your response of the business rate review, the new homes bonus. So my question was, is that worst case scenario? I'll come to you, Mrs. Keane.
I just want to reassure committee, no, it's not a worst case scenario. I have very limited information on what future government settlements will be. I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately. But if I refer you to Appendix A, we have assumed in there a damping forecast, which gradually reduces the amount of government funding. So we have used the next best thing to a crystal ball, which is some external advisors on what they think future funding will be. it would not be prudent for me to set out a worst case scenario and for us to try and achieve a transformation programme to achieve savings to deal with a worst case scenario. What's presented in Appendix A and as part of this budget is a prudent forecast of what we think a reasonable assumption of future funding will be for our council.
Thank you for that answer. That was my question. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on the main body of the report? Councillor.
Chair, it was clear from the responses from consultation that the whole recycling piece is important, and that was evidenced by the 8,000 plus responses I think we had to the survey. And I note the allocation of that 130 that you just indicated, Councillor Cutler, that we've received, you're going to earmark for the food waste implementation. Does that now mean, because we did have some money left over from previous budgets of the food waste project, does that now mean that we are in a position at this stage to keep that moving forward with that additional amount, given the level of interest and residents' sort of support for those initiatives? Thank you.
I mean, once again, we are taking estimates based on the position we're in at the moment, which is, you know, we don't have absolute clarity as to what the process is going to be. So we have to work on the principle that, you know, that there's 400,000 in there for implementation of broader elements of the waste strategy, and we do have sufficient reserves there. So one way or another we can cover it, but by putting the figures that we've got at the moment into the system, it will change. You know, again, you can only budget on the information you have at the time. That's a good estimate. It is a crucial project, and we've ensured that there are enough reserves there as well to cover the cost of doing that.
Any other questions before we come on to the appendices? No? Okay, we'll come on to Appendix A on page 70. Does anybody have any questions on Appendix A? No? Appendix B on page 73. No. Councillor Horrell.
Sorry, Chair. I know it's some in the report. It talks about we can't influence this, but the external audit fee of 100,000 is a significant number. We're sort of, I think, strapped into that, but it would just be good to understand, is that absolutely the case? That's a significant cost. Thank you.
Yes, we're in the disgraceful situation where, with the abolition of the Audit Commission, there was a tender process for external audit fees that EY won in our case. We worked with other councils on that tender. For the last 5 years, they've been complaining that they underbid, and it was costing them a lot more for that service. And I think it was around about 55,000 a year. The new the rebidding process to renew the contract took place last year, and it came in with £100,000 increase on that 56,000 we had before. So it's now 156,000. We also have the terrible situation that EY have not succeeded in doing our external audit last year, and it looks like government are saying that, unfortunately, the backlog is so great, we'll have a backstop next September, and after that, those previous year audits won't be done. So it seems likely we won't get the last of our £56,000 audit, and they'll be straight into their £150,000 audit. That's where we are. We're not in as risky a situation as other councils on external audit, because they've found very little over the last few years, and a value for money judgment they will do for last year. Other councils have got several years outstanding, and where those risks are hiding, given some of the problems the councils have, I personally think it's a disgraceful situation we've got into with external audit, and that extra cost we can't do anything about.
Thank you. Any other questions on Appendix B? No, Appendix C on page 75 then. Any questions on that? So I had a question on Appendix C. On the digital transformation, it's 400,000 right across all of the years. So is there not a specific digital transformation project that then would take a higher volume and then everything settles down? You don't need any money allocated to it. Or is that general replacement of laptops as they break? What's actually included? Because digital transformation is transformation, not maintenance.
Yes, Chair, there is specific one-off funding within the transitional reserve to help us to do the invest to save for some of our major transformations to address our TC25 project. But there is also the digital transformation reserve there, where we will be looking at making ongoing upgrades and digital changes to services ongoing.
So that's more of a just in case forecast. If things come up, we'll spend it, but if it doesn't, it doesn't, because you're not going to spend that amount the same every year, are you?
No, because of the time frame over which we're looking at this, it's an estimation of what our investment might be on an ongoing basis. But obviously, technology being technology, it upgrades, it improves over time. So there's an acknowledgement there that there will always be a need to continue to invest in it.
Thank you. Appendix D on page 77. Any questions on Appendix D? And finally, Appendix E on page 79 and 80. Do you have any questions on that? No. Any debate on this paper? Councillor Reach.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, it's quite an incredible feat to get, a quart in a pint pot, or whatever the phrase is. Given the constraints I think we've been under, we've heard a lot this evening about fair funding for small f's for local government. While we see the cost of providing the services, essential services, increasing by significantly above inflation, the inputs into that, the revenue, is capped at significantly below inflation. So we're seeing a real terms cut year on year in our resources. Against that backdrop, I think it's an impressive piece of work that we can maintain the services we do. We've heard a bit about government grants, and although of course we are incredibly, we laud the beneficence of His Majesty's government in providing money through the year for certain schemes, it's an exceedingly inefficient way of funding local government, ties up officer time on bidding for things that may or may not be successful. It also ties up officer time on bidding for things that can be successful, and in the case of schemes such as perhaps Mini Hollands, that subsequently get pulled by government on a whim. I think that given that backdrop, it's an impressive piece of work that we've got to where we are, but we just sincerely hope that local government is put on a far more sustainable footing in the future. But I'm assured that what we've got in front of us is a stable and sensible revenue budget.
Anybody else have any debate on this paper? Okay, I will say my bit then. Where you say sensible, I say bland. I'm glad that you've balanced this budget, but the only two things I see that are any real different from previous year was TC25 and the food waste. I don't see any ways, and obviously some inspirational moments may come out of TC25, and I genuinely hope they do. But
I don't see anything in here really that's wonderful that you've done it this year. It's just you've done that and then you've added in these two other things. So I'm pleased that you brought this to us, but my view is that it's quite a bland budget, but thank you. Any other debate? No. In that case, our comments will be noted. On the general fund, I've got that they will come back on the total received from government for designated activities over and above the forecast, and to take away and looking at more consultation on the TC25. Was there anything else that I've missed? No. Okay, so we can move on to the capital investment paper. Again, we have Councillor Cutler introing it and Ms Keys here to support us. It's recommended that we as a scrutiny committee comment on the proposals within the attached cabinet report, Cabinet Cab 3443, which is again considered at its meeting on the 8th of February 24. Councillor Cutler, over to you to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Capital Investments Strategy report sets out the Council's capital spending programme and the principles which underpin this in order to deliver the desired outcomes as set out in the Council plan. It details the overall programme for the next 10 years, how it's financed, the governance around it, the appetite for risk, and the impact on the Council's medium-term financial strategy. Capital programme totals 444.7 million over the next 10 years, of which 39 million is general fund and 405.7 relates to the HRA. Appendix A provides the capital programme by project divided into approved for spend and subject to appraisal. Key projects in this programme are also detailed in the report. The strategy sets out the approval process and project programme management protocols. It also includes in the body of the report and Appendix F several prudential indicators as required by the CIPFA Prudential Code and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Community statutory investment advice. So there's a lot of detail about how we have to do things in this report. And we have Neil Aiken here, who is the absolute expert on all the fine detail of that report.
Ms Keys?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would just add to what Councillor Cutler said, that the Prudential Code requires me as Section 151 officer to consider the affordability and the risk associated with our capital programme that's set out in the paper. The Council's 10-year investment programme is ambitious, but Winchester has a long history of successfully managing its capital assets to support its objectives while minimising the risks associated with that. And I just want to just reaffirm the statement that I make in the report, that I consider the proposed programme to be affordable, sustainable and prudent.
Thank you, Ms Keys. Okay, so the main body of the report is page 81 to 110. Do we have any questions on the main body of the report? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. And I should have said at the start, one of the items in this that talks about the Bar End depot. My house overlooks it, so I'll just declare that we do overlook the site at this point. And my question relates to the Bar End depot. I see we've allocated £200,000 for the demolition of the depot. There are two questions, if I may. One is, it was the council's MOT garage, amongst other things, so one would assume the ground could be contaminated in that area. Are we aware of that? Does that make this slightly more risky? And then the second thing, we've held a number of consultation events with local residents around the redevelopment of the depot site. I'm not sure, we talked about demolition. Is that on the pathway that we've set out for residents? How does that fit in with the wider project, please?
Can I interject at that point? I was going to bring this up at the tail end of the meeting because your forward plan is printed on your desks because it was late being produced. When we discussed it with the chair and I in advance of the meeting and what was going to be on the agenda, we discussed putting the Bar End depot on the agenda at the next scrutiny meeting. However, because that was going to come imminently to cabinet. However, that's now moved until
June, July time. So if I can just come to Ms Taylor to explain why, that would be useful. It just felt like the right time to mention it as you were asking a question.
Thank you, Chair. And also I can probably answer a little bit of Councillor Reach's question as well. As members know, the development at Bar End to follow from the hugely successful development of the leisure centre at Bar End has been a council's ambition for some time. And as members are aware, we have carried out extensive resident engagement down in the locality, along with a wider piece of engagement to establish the best use. As members are aware, we have been out for expressions of interest in order to dispose of that site to a third party. The finance team might correct me, but I believe this is a holding figure in the account because it depends on the offers that come back and whether that offer includes demolition within the price and etc. etc. So there are no immediate plans to demolish the Bar End depot, but we are awaiting the confirmation of the most appropriate and best and the bidder that can bring the best outcome for our residents in line with our council policies. We had hoped that that work would be completed in order that we could bring an update to the next scrutiny committee, but as I'm sure you appreciate, and I'm sure the leader would say, it's really very, very important we make the right decision for that, and due to the due diligence that is required for that, that work is not expected to come forward for cabinet until potentially July, which means that it won't be ready for this committee to have a meaningful conversation about it at the March cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. And just on that, I've also, having found out that was delayed and not coming to scrutiny at our next meeting, we've sort of banded around ideas like maybe we might have a member briefing or it comes to a future scrutiny meeting. So that will evolve at some point, but that's not a conversation for now. But I hope that answers some of your questions. Thank you. Any other questions on the main body of the capital strategy? Capital investment, sorry. Councillor Reid.
It's the other part of the question I asked on the previous paper, sorry, around the Guildhall. So there's a point on page 97 around the investment in the Guildhall. I think it's about fire safety and insulation and the like, so seems to be a sensible thing to do. But it would be good to understand the council's views for the long term for this building, please.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Absolutely, Councillor Reid. As many people know, the Guildhall is a much beloved and very well respected building in the centre of Winchester. It had a lively community offer and commercial offer. But as we know, everything is different post the pandemic, and we were very fortunate to have a reasonably long-term let from the courts over the pandemic. Public entertainment is different now, and we have a beautiful historic building, and there is a limit to what we can easily offer that is commercially viable and respects the fabric of the building. So you're completely correct. The budget that is in here is about fire safety works in order that we can continue to offer weddings. We do a fantastic range in school proms. We offer conferences, things that are more conference and community based rather than what we used to offer, which was a range of discos and stand-up comedy. And our friends and colleagues up the road at the Theatre Royal now offer that for our community. So it's also around finding what is the right thing for the council to offer in a building that is essentially funded by public money. So the money that is in the budget is indeed to ensure that essential works are undertaken in order that we can offer an appropriate range. And I think earlier you talked around Abbey House, again, a beautiful building. And what are the opportunities that we could sensitively use that on a more public basis for perhaps high-end weddings, you know, somewhere where it's a small group that could respect the fabric of that building. So that is the money that is identified in the budget. Have I answered it now?
I wasn't as clear as I should have been. Sorry. What I was just saying was it's a lot of money. We're not prejudging what the future strategy for this building might be, are we? Is it the right time to spend that money now?
well, the works are essential, and we have to maintain the building at a standard where it is lettable. Otherwise, it is a heavy burden on the council's budget to maintain it without bringing any income in. And we've recently appointed a new Guildhall manager who comes from a commercial background, and we have a series of events planned to continue to drive that graduation conference community use on a larger scale over 2 to 3 days. And there is demand for that. Our books are picking up towards the end of the year, so we do need to do some work on that one for sure. But we make sure that the rooms that are here are available for hire for, there's not a lot of places where you could have this set up for a meeting. So these are available for hire, and these are available for our staff use as well. So we make sure that we're sweating the asset as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reach. Do we have any other questions in this main body of this report? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, can we just seek clarification on page 97? We still have the demolition costs in for the River Park Leisure Centre, and they're in for 24-25, but we still yet to have we haven't had any visibility regarding the next steps on that site from the University of Southampton. So I'm just questioning whether that 2 million for 24-25 is a realistic timing for that potential cost to us. Thank you.
Shall I take this one, Leader, or would you like to?
Either way, essentially what we're doing, as is normal practice, and is something that indeed was done by the previous administration, is we're providing a funding envelope which is there in the event that it is needed and comes forward as part of the ongoing discussions about the use of that site in order to demolish it. But there are planning implications of demolition of the building, and what matters is securing a good plan for that area for the longer term.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Horrell? You're looking like it doesn't.
So we've got the money, but we don't know when we're going to spend it, I think was the answer.
No, that's not correct. But what we also haven't, we know that there will become a time where the building will need to be demolished. We have made space for that in the budget. We have not made a set a date for when that is going to happen.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, and I might have skipped on to the appendix, but the specific number in the capital budget for 59 Colbert Street is the 610,000, which was the entire cost. My understanding was, though, that we weren't paying all of that when we made that proposal. It was split 3 ways. But I think Hampshire were giving some, we were funding it. So just questioning why we've got all of that in, or have we then got a repayment coming from the other pots of money? Thank you.
Yes, so that is the capital programme. So because it's our scheme, we show the full cost of that scheme within our capital programme, and then the financing, how that is financed, is shown in Appendix B. So we show that the sort of the grossed up value of that.
Any other questions on this main body of this report? No, I shall come on to the appendices then. So we have Appendix A on page 113. Does anybody have any questions on Appendix A? Okay, Appendix B on page 115. Any questions on Appendix B? Appendix C, page 117. Do we have any questions of that? And Appendix D on page 119. Any questions? E, 121. Any takers for that one? No. Okay, F, the big one, 123 to 128. Do we have any questions on Appendix F? And finally, Appendix G, page 129. Any questions specifically on that one? No takers. Okay, do we have any debate on this paper, please? Councillor Reach.
Just a very quick one. Don't worry, I won't bloviate again. Just to say, we talked about the Guildhall. It's close to everyone's hearts. It'd be great to see, the plans for it. And thank you for the chief exec for setting out next steps. And I'm sorry to tell members that in 5 minutes' time, the wine tasting that's going on downstairs will conclude. So we'll miss it this evening. But perhaps in future we can avoid scheduling the committee at the same time as the wine tasting downstairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reach. Perhaps we could bring the wine tasting up here next time, should it clash. Any other debate on this paper? No, I don't have any specific points noted down to take away from this, unless anybody corrects me otherwise. I think our questions were answered on this one. You've got off lightly considering you are the expert of all things in this room, haven't you? We haven't put any pressure on you on this one. So thank you. We have met our brief and commented on the proposals in the attached cabinet report. So thank you. We shall now move on to our latest work programme and item 10. Thank you all for attending this evening and supporting us on the Treasury and capital papers. So the work programme for 23-24 for scrutiny. I've discussed our work programme and the 3-month forward plan with the chief exec. And there is a cabinet report regarding waste scheduled for March 14th at the cabinet meeting, but it prints on the night of scrutiny, which is the 6th. So I've asked for a presentation to be brought to us on that paper, but for those of us who do have time, we can squirrel away and quickly read the committee report before scrutiny, but just be aware that we won't specifically have that, which is why I've asked for a presentation on the night of that paper and that particular item, so that we don't have to all try and squeeze in all of our questions on one committee report that will have a short space of time to read. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, isn't that a good example of why we need to really look at the scheduling? Something like the waste project, which is hugely important to residents and a very important project going forward, and the complexity of what has to be done. That we've seen some outlined thoughts about that. We haven't seen any financials at all on this yet. That we in scrutiny should at least have an opportunity to look at that with proper time and consideration to add value to whatever the decision should be. Just squeezing it in seems really not appropriate given the significance of the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I'll pass this to Ms Taylor, but just to say that most of it is it's not like we're creating a whole new waste management project. We're already in the contract. It's expanding what we have to meet other things. So, Mrs Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed, we are under somewhat of a little bit of time pressure from the government on this one, in that we are required to amend our service to include food waste, which we absolutely, completely agree. And we are clearly under some pressure from the county council, who wishes to change and potentially invest in a new facility to dispose of said waste. So we are obliged to reply to the county council with our preference, shall we say, of our onward collection system in order to meet their requirements, as yet undetermined, for the disposal of waste. And as members know, there was a very fulsome discussion at our policy committee recently, and a very comprehensive set of slides detailing the options and reflecting the consultation and engagement that has taken place with an absolutely fantastic response rate. And the report that is coming to Cabinet will confirm the way forward for a future waste service. However, we are, or shall we say, the strategy in principle, but we are some way away from defining the detail of that service. But we have to reply to the county council, and we have to make a commitment around food waste in order to order the vehicles, because there are approximately 800 food waste vehicles built every year. And if every council in the land orders them, we need 3,000 across the nation. So we really need to bring forward some priority decisions, which will be within a standard frame of accepted waste collection measures. So it is the strategic decision and direction of travel that will be coming to Cabinet both in February and March. So, of course, it would be ideal if this committee could see it, but as we know, at this council, we have policy committees and they are forward-looking, and the policy committee was able to review and give comments to shape the paper that's come to scrutiny. And all of our policy and scrutiny committees are determined and defined as overview and scrutiny committees. So fully appropriate that it went to a policy committee on this occasion.
I was just going to also say that this is a specific case, but noted that in general, we've discussed many times that we need to look at the scheduling to make sure that things aren't bunched up and we're not having scrutiny reports on major decisions the day or 2 days before cabinet meetings. So noted.
Chair, I would just say, I accept the policy committee discussed it. We've had no discussion about budget, and I think that is inappropriate. I'm noting that is the case, and the timings don't allow proper scrutiny of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Some of those numbers will come to us in the presentation. So hopefully the questions will come to our minds during the presentation. But noted that we won't have time to properly scrutinise the committee report.
I think it's very important that we don't treat it as if this is like the one moment where we ever talk about waste. It's in the budget discussion that we just talked about. It's in the capital programme. It's been to the Health and Environment Policy Committee more than once. There have been cabinet papers on the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy. We have been having an ongoing discussion with colleagues, sharing the data, sharing the information that's coming in, showing how we use it to inform, getting input on how we use that information to inform our policy choices on a pretty continuous basis, including, I think we've had member briefings as well, over the course of the last year. Obviously, the involvement of scrutiny is absolutely important. We have had a timetable put to us by Hampshire, which effectively sets some very tight dates that we need to talk about in terms of the exact format of what it is that we're doing. And so obviously we want to involve scrutiny in that decision-making process, and that's what we're trying to do, albeit within the context of very tight constraints on the timing that we're facing in terms of external pressures. And you know, as soon as we have things that are worth discussing, we will try and get them to you as soon as we can. And we will also try and get as much information as we can to you ahead of that meeting, you know, so you have time to digest what we hope will be most of the information that you would be getting in the cabinet paper.
Thank you, Councillor Todd, and I think that would be useful because we're having the presentation. If the presentation was included in our scrutiny deck, at least we'd have some information that might be useful.
I'm very happy to talk to officers about that. I would be keen to get as much as we possibly can, and also perhaps remind people of some of the other papers that sit behind it. It will be useful, for example, for colleagues to recap on what's already gone to the scrutiny of the Health and Environment Policy Committee, which laid out the choices that we have in front of us, I think, in some detail, and that will be useful background. So that has been looked at by councillors, maybe not this particular group of councillors, but it will provide useful background to any decision. And indeed, it might be worth inviting the chair of that committee to come along to provide any perspective that committee has on the pre-scrutiny process as well. They could be a useful additional colleague around the table.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments on the work programme for 23-24? No. Okay, on to our final item 11, to note the latest forward plan on key decisions. The forward plan is due to be published on the 31st of January 2024. It was, at the time of printing, it was due. So it was printed, but it was a little late, which is why it's on our tables. Any comments on the forward plan? And again, I look at the chief executive 3 months ahead. But of course, that 3 months does shift quite a lot in the meantime, but we do look 3 months ahead to see if there's anything specific that needs to come to scrutiny. No. Okay, in that case, that concludes our formal business for this evening. Thank you for your engagement, thank you for your questioning, and thank you to our portfolio holders for attending. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.